Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 5 waiver wire pickups for the 2025 fantasy football season. Now, if you've thought the season thus far has been incredibly chaotic and unpredictable, now we entered into the equation bye weeks. There are 4 teams experiencing a bye week here in Week 5. The Falcons, the Bears, the Steelers, and the Packers. So we won't have the services of said players. Therefore, we'll have to hit up the waiver wire to, of course, pick up streaming options, or for those of us dealing with injuries, pick up players that are not only going to help us here in Week 5, but for hopefully the remainder of the 2025 season. With players such as Malik Neighbors going down with a season-ending injury, Lamar Jackson, of course, dealing with a hamstring. We have Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, who are questionable going into Thursday night's game against the Los Angeles Rams. Hopefully, we can, of course, talk about players at a variety of different positions: running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defense, in order to help you out this week. Before I get into today's video, if you guys are looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description. I have timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel, as I'm making daily fantasy content for the entirety of the season to help you capture a championship. And of course, by subscribing today, I get one step closer to achieving my goal this season of 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much for all the support. The final thing I wanted to mention before we get into today's content, specifically talking about someone like Woody Marks, at the end of today's episode, I will be putting together a couple of plays via Betr, like I've mentioned before, for those of you who are potentially trying to make plays every single week and put my predictions to the test, and of course get my Sunday morning rankings for the remainder of the season. Be sure to travel down to the description and check out Betr. I'll be, of course, partnering with them for the entirety of the season. So when you sign up today using code Andrew and make that first time deposit minimum of 10, make a first time play minimum of $1 within a real cash play, you'll not only be eligible to get on that email list and receive those rankings for half full PPR, all-encompassing rankings every single Sunday morning, but you'll also be eligible to get a free $10 via sign up. So for those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and of course take advantage of the opportunity today. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into talking about my top waiver wire pickups for the running back position, beginning with Woody Marks. Currently rostered in 37% of sleeper leagues, 31% of Yahoo leagues. He's coming off an incredible performance of course, 21 total touches in an advantageous matchup taking on the Tennessee Titans. And for weeks to come, with our upcoming schedule looking like Baltimore, a bye week, Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, yes, it's going to get far more difficult, but if Woody Marks is going to etch out an even greater role within this backfield based on his contributions and his effectiveness in comparison to Nick Chubb, then we really don't have to worry. As of right now, the genie is out of the bottle, and you can't put it back when it comes to the talent of Woody Marks, especially considering this is the first game of the season in which he has outsnapped Nick Chubb. Now, when we talk about this backfield and the future of it for the remainder of the 2025 season, sure, Joe Mixon enters the chat, but from what we have heard over the course of this season, and most specifically earlier today, D'Amico Ryans, the head coach of the Houston Texans, said, quote unquote, Joe Mixon is not close to a return. Therefore, if we're anticipating Woody Marks to continue to get himself a lot of utilization, not only on the ground but through the air within this offense, an offense that, yes, has struggled thus far this season but are finding their identity slowly but surely, Woody Marks as a 3-down back capable of not only finding success on the ground near the goal line, but of course through the air, should be not only the number one pickup, but someone that we're prioritizing as a potential start, as many of us are dealing with injuries and of course bye weeks here in Week 5. The next player I wanted to mention is Kenneth Gainwell. Yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers are on a bye, but very similar in which I just mentioned with Woody Marks. You know, Kenneth Gainwell, I mean, the genie is out of the bottle. In this circumstance, we have a player that had himself an incredible performance of 19 carries for 99, 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions on 6 targets for 35, 28.4 fantasy points against the Minnesota Vikings defense. Many of us woke up on Sunday morning, 5 a.m., PST, and realized that Jaylen Warren and his injury was not going to play due to, of course, the fact that they have a bye week in Week 5. Maybe we should have seen this coming, but nonetheless, in his absence, Kenneth Gainwell was an unstoppable force. So once, in fact, Jaylen Warren and the Steelers return from their bye week in Week 6, there is a potential in which this becomes a two-headed monster. Even though Jaylen Warren from weeks 1 through 3 when healthy was averaging 12.97 half PPR fantasy points per game, there is potential in which this backfield, who was previously from weeks 1 through 3 a 70-30 opportunity split between Warren and Gainwell, begins to look a lot more like 60-40 or maybe even 50-50 based on the contributions of both of these running backs and, of course, their effectiveness. The next running back I wanted to mention is Tyjae Spears, currently only rostered in 35% of sleeper, 32% of Yahoo leagues. It's kind of a surprise in my mind, primarily because, again, Tyjae Spears is a running back that is immediately going to be fantasy relevant. So the fact that you weren't able to already stash him on your IR is surprising at a higher rate than 35+%. But as we proceed, again, we have to remember he is coming off of the injured reserve. He's coming off of a high ankle sprain. I don't expect him to be limited. I expect him to be at a full capacity come week 5 and of course contribute to our fantasy teams. Almost in the same way in which he did last season in games in which he played alongside of Tony Pollard. In those games, averaging 8.9 opportunities per game and 8.41 half PPR fantasy points per game. As long as the Tennessee Titans are going to be implicated for negative game scripts for the remainder of the season, which it looks like they are as an 0-4 start. I mean, again, in the final 3 games of Tyjae Spears' 2024 season, he put up 24.2, 20.1, and 11.8 fantasy points. We know that he can contribute by himself or with Tony Pollard. Expect a lot of success going forward here. The next player I wanted to mention is in regards to the Miami Dolphins and tonight's game, in which we have Ollie Gordon taking on the New York Jets. Prior to tonight's game, if you haven't yet already, and he is potentially available, considering Ollie Gordon is only rostered in 44% of Sleeper Leagues, 32% of Yahoo Leagues, I would pick him up just in case his usage share looks very much so similar to what he was experiencing against the Buffalo Bills back in week 3. So if the opportunity presents itself to where you can pick him up prior to the upcoming waiver period, so you don't have to utilize either a fab and or additionally waiver priority, Ollie Gordon could be a pretty sneaky pickup, because not only is he going to see himself potentially more rushing opportunity share within a far more closer script, but additionally he has a fantastic matchup in week 5 taking on the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers have given up 15.5 fantasy points per game just off rushing statistics isolated, and are allowing 5.37 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs from weeks 1 through 4. Jacksonville ran for 173 on them, Arizona 48 and a touchdown, Atlanta ran for 122, and the New England Patriots ran for 97 and 2 rushing touchdowns yesterday against this Carolina defense. So why not Ollie Gordon in the event in which his role continues to expand within this rushing approach? Number 5, we have Kendre Miller. Look, Kendre Miller is probably the least rostered player that I'm going to mention in this entire kind of conversation of running back, primarily because the running back conversation, typically we know the most valuable handcuffs and contributors, but Kendre Miller, currently 7% rostered sleeper, 5% rostered on Yahoo. Again, technically is the handcuff to Alvin Kamara. And the most recent kind of opportunity share that Kendre Miller has been exposed to in this week, 11 carries for 65 and a touchdown. That can't be ignored. So going forward, if there's going to be a potential in which he continues to carve out a role within this offense, or potentially in the event in which Alvin Kamara is traded this season to a potential contender like the Kansas City Chiefs, Washington Commanders, or to a team that prior to the trade deadline loses their starting running back to a season-ending injury, I think there's a potential in which, of course, Kendre Miller could not only be valuable henceforth, specifically in week 5 against the Giants, but potentially in the post-Alvin Kamara iteration of this offense. Again, for right now, those are speculatory, kind of assumptions, but as of going into this upcoming week, taking on the Giants is a top 5 matchup at the running back position, so Kendre Miller could certainly be a value in a deeper league. We move on to Chris Rodriguez Jr., who's coming off a week in which he had 7 carries for 59, another week in which he wasn't given a whole lot of overall opportunity share, but alongside of Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt and Jeremy McNichols, we get all these running backs playing about 30% of the offensive snaps. This truly is a backfield committee situation. If an injury was to occur, of course, Chris Rodriguez Jr. could get himself more opportunity share. If they are in a positive game script, he could also see himself more opportunity share, but for right now, he is an option that is out there and available coming off of back-to-back weeks, a pretty solid utilization, but in the grand scheme, not the most exciting player in the entire market. Now, if we want to go ahead and mention just one singular honorable mention, currently rostered in 6% of Sleeper, 2% of Yahoo Leagues, is Brashard Smith, the rookie running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. I understand that, of course, Pacheco and Kareem Hunt have both scored at least 1 touchdown in the last 2 games, which again is relatively solid for their fantasy value. But earlier this morning, Andy Reid, via interview, specifically said that, quote unquote, Matt Nagy is trying to increase Smith's reps every week and put him in a position where he can do some things. Overall, again, we're going to potentially see the expansion of Brashard Smith's role within this backfield if Pacheco and, of course, Kareem Hunt cannot build upon it. But this is something that is a lottery ticket later in the season in the event in which one of those 2 running backs go down. Of course, Brashard Smith could present himself as a viable option. All right, let's continue on with the wide receiver conversation. Beginning with the first player I wanted to mention, Romeo Doubs, currently rostered in 45% sleeper, 40% of Yahoo formats, coming off a week in which he scored 3 touchdowns. Anytime he scored 3 touchdowns, it's 3 touchdowns. I don't care if it's a fluke. I don't care if it's a shootout. The fact of the matter is Romeo Doubs is continuing to be looked at as the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. And as long as that is the case, I understand that the Packers are going on a bye week here. But once they come back, we have the Bengals, Cardinals, Steelers, Panthers, Eagles, and Giants as the upcoming matchups. Therefore, you'll find a lot of value in Romeo Doubs as a potential streaming option every single week henceforth, with the potential of course, scoring touchdowns as this Packers offense continues to air it out. as they proceed. Now, another player that we wanted to mention is Wan'Dale Robinson. And honestly, I want to also mention Darius Slayton in this same vein, primarily because it is incredibly unfortunate that Malik Neighbors had himself a season-ending injury. But going forward, how do we adapt? Well, first and foremost, we want to address the pickups of Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton. Wan'Dale Robinson most likely is already rostered in your league, but I wanted to mention him here just in case he wasn't, as Darius Slayton is only rostered in 5 and 2% of leagues, but 5% on Sleeper, 2% on Yahoo. So when we talk about the potential of these two players, we actually had a glimpse of their upside of opportunity share in the absence of Neighbors last season, in which there was a 2-week span from weeks 5 and 6 of the 2024 campaign in which Malik Neighbors missed due to concussion protocol. In that span of time, Wan'Dale Robinson, week 5 against Seattle without Neighbors, 9 targets, 6 catches, 36 and a touchdown, 13.0 fantasy points. The week after without Neighbors against Cincinnati, 11 targets, 5 grabs, 50 yards, 7.5 fantasy points and a half PPR. Again, incredibly relevant, and he's going to continue to be for the remainder of the season with Jaxson Dart in the absence of Malik Neighbors. Now, what I'm excited about with Darius Slayton is that we get a receiver that wasn't already previously relevant and now is, because of the opportunity share that he'll be exposed to. In week 5 last season against Seattle without Neighbors, 11 targets, 8 grabs, 122 and a touchdown, 22.2 fantasy points. In week 6 against Cincinnati, 11 targets, again without Neighbors in the lineup, 6 receptions, 57, 8.7 fantasy points. I expect both these receivers to be relevant. Obviously, Jaxson Dart didn't have the greatest contribution in terms of his passing effectiveness, but overall, as he continues to learn over the course of the remainder of the season, and the more negative game scripts that are presented, it of course will lead to even more opportunity for Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson to be fantasy relevant. The next player I wanted to mention is Troy Franklin. If somebody somehow, someway dropped him in your league last week because of the disappointing week 3 performance, please do yourself a favor and pick up Troy Franklin. Not only is he clearing away the number 2 receiving option in terms of snaps, routes, but again, future usage. Again, we have to remember Troy Franklin was the number 1 receiver of a Bo Nix Oregon offense when they were both in college. They are very much so familiar with one another, and once they are put in positions in which we are giving Troy Franklin more opportunity, which he certainly will find in coming weeks, could potentially even happen tonight against the Bengals, but when these opportunities begin to, of course, flow in his direction, he is going to be incredibly fantasy relevant. So look in his direction as a potential pickup if, in fact, you can pick him up prior to tonight's game against the Bengals. The next player I wanted to mention is Jalen Coker. This is the 3rd consecutive week that we've mentioned him. As of right now, coming off of the injured reserve, only rostered in 14% of Sleeper leagues, 9% of Yahoo leagues. Again, we know that Adam Thielen was the primary slot receiving option for this offense for the last couple seasons, and certainly was incredibly fantasy relevant with Bryce Young. Over the course of the last couple weeks, in the absence of Adam Thielen and, of course, Jalen Coker, we have seen other wide receivers contribute. We've also seen Xavier Legette miss significant time, Hunter Renfrow at times be relevant, but ultimately Jalen Coker, who showed a lot of potential in his rookie campaign in 2024, has himself an opportunity to expand upon a role in which he immediately can become relevant, taking on the Miami Dolphins in Week 5 of the 2025 season. Number 6, we have Tory Horton, the rookie wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. The offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks, Clint Kubiak, earlier last week said that Tory Horton reminds him of Justin Jefferson. The reason why this is important is because Clint Kubiak was the offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings the rookie year in which Justin Jefferson was there and a part of that team. Over the course of this season thus far, weeks 2 and 3, score touchdowns has been relevant. In this most recent week, had a deep ball opportunity, had which he had caught it, could have easily scored a touchdown as well. Unfortunately, he was not able to come down with that ball. He is a sneaky potential pickup in play going forward as a part of this offense that, again, is beginning to trend upward. Again, there is a lot of competition with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and of course, Cooper Kupp. So for those of you who are in a deeper league, potentially look in the direction of Tory Horton. The next 3 players I wanted to mention are honorable mentions. We have Isaiah Bond, Jalen Tolbert, and Luke McCaffrey. With Cedric Tillman dealing with a hamstring injury, Isaiah Bond becomes the next man up within that receiving core. Then we have Jalen Tolbert in the absence of one CeeDee Lamb has gotten himself a lot of looks in last night's game. And then we have Luke McCaffrey, who in the absence of Terry McLaurin, even though he is not playing very many offensive snaps, when he does so, he is finding the end zone with Marcus Mariota, who could end up starting once again this week against the Chargers. Let's move on to the tight end conversation. We begin with Brenton Strange, who thus far this season has established himself as a top 16 tight end rest of season based on not only the opportunity share that he's been exposed to, 7 targets in each of the last 2 games, but the contributions in terms of the fact that he is thus far this season the number 1 receiver in terms of receptions and receiving yards amongst all Jacksonville Jaguars. As long as that continues to be the case, he's going to continue to be fantasy relevant. Taking on the Kansas City Chiefs this week, in which we most recently saw Mark Andrews last night come away with a lot of receptions. Hopefully that kind of scoreline will be in line for Brenton Strange's potential. As of thus far this season, the backup tight ends of the Jacksonville Jaguars are stealing touchdowns, but once in fact those touchdowns start to go in his direction, he is certainly going to be not only a top 16 option, but of course top 12 within those upcoming contests. We move on to our number 2, Darren Waller. If you have an opportunity of picking him up before tonight's game, for those of you who are dealing with inconsistency at the tight end position, I think there's an opportunity to beat the waiver wire in the form of Darren Waller. Again, he's currently only rostered in 9% of sleeper leagues, 5% of Yahoo leagues. Takes on the Carolina Panthers next week. Again, we are potentially just picking him up this week just to see what the limited usage of his overall opportunity share is going to look like. We know that, of course, Mike McDaniel and this offense utilized Jonnu Smith at a very healthy rate late last season. So if they're going to implement Darren Waller within that immediate role, we have to remember that the offensive coordinator of the Dolphins is the former tight ends coach of Darren Waller when they were both in Las Vegas. So there should be an immediate potential in which Darren Waller could be relevant within this offense. And the fact that they take on Carolina next week, again, the Carolina Panthers have allowed the following statistics to opposing tight ends. New England tight ends, 3 catches, 63 and a touchdown. Arizona, 8 for 123. Jacksonville this season, 5 for 65 and a touchdown. The final tight end I wanted to mention is Dalton Schultz. It's not a sexy pickup, but for those of you who are in desperate need of a potential tight end pickup and play, currently rostered in 16% of sleeper, 19% of Yahoo formats, coming off of back-to-back weeks in which he has seen 6 targets, 4 and 5 receptions. In a full PPR, certainly a better play in comparison to half PPR because I don't believe he is the greatest touchdown upside performer. But the Ravens, as of late, against opposing tight ends, haven't been, playing relatively well. As a defense, they haven't played well. We know that Marlon Humphreys is going to be out for a significant volume of time. We additionally know that Matabuke, one of the best defensive linemen, is going to have a season-ending injury. Again, thus far this season, Ravens against the tight end position. Buffalo, 7 for 97 and a touchdown. Cleveland, 9 for 88. Detroit, 4 for 33. And Kansas City, 6 for 49. If we can get a 6 for 49 game out of Schultz, that would be fantastic here in week 5. We begin with Jaxson Dart, the rookie wonder that was able to defeat a 3-0 Los Angeles Chargers team. Again, that is incredible history that is being made. And going forward, hopefully Jaxson Dart is going to continue the history that he is beginning to build. Over the course of the last 2 seasons, the only quarterbacks who have been able to have themselves 10 rushing attempts or more, 50 rushing yards, and 1 rushing touchdown in a singular game consists of Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Justin Fields. And when we add Jaxson Dart to that list, coming off of a week in which he had 10 carries, 54, and a rushing touchdown, he is joining the upper echelon of the quarterback conversation. So if he can catch up in terms of his passing yardage in the overall usage in that overall category, while also maintaining the rushing utilization that he saw on Sunday, he is certainly going to be not only fantasy relevant, but someone that we should be picking up because he may be undeniable in short term. When we're talking about the upcoming matchup against the New Orleans Saints, I understand that there could be some difficulties for Jaxson Dart with no more Malik Neighbors, but regardless of whether we do find him in a positive or negative game script, he is implicated for a lot of potential upside. Therefore, he's the number 1 pickup at the quarterback conversation. Then we move on to Matthew Stafford. As of right now, rostered in 41% of sleeper, 42% of Yahoo leagues, coming off an incredible performance. 375 and 3 touchdowns, a 71% passing completion percentage, 2+ passing touchdowns in each of the last 3 games. I'm not the biggest fan of starting a quarterback that is a statue in the pocket and doesn't have mobility, but in the terms of potentially picking up a player, considering the 4 teams on bye, many of us will be missing either Caleb Williams or, of course, Jordan Love from our starting lineups. Matthew Stafford on a short week, taking on the 49ers, who offensively are dealing with a bunch of injuries. Brock Purdy questionable, Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, all these guys questionable. There may be another week in which we have Mac Jones, in which his number 1 receiving options are Kendrick Bourne and Demarcus Robinson. So, of course, it could lead to even more opportunity for the Rams offense to score points and Matthew Stafford to find another successful week for fantasy purposes. The next players I wanted to mention are 2 players that are playing tonight. Jake Browning, who next week will take on the Detroit Lions. I don't love the potential of his upside this week against the Denver Broncos, but against the Detroit Lions, I would expect a lot of potential for passing and, of course, statistics that he can find in garbage time. Or, of course, if they're able to at least warm him up a little bit, get him back to being fantasy relevant just like he was in 2023. Now, the other quarterback I wanted to mention is Tua Tagovailoa because in week 5, he takes on the Carolina Panthers. There's a lot of opportunity there for Tua Tagovailoa to find success considering the Carolina Panthers as an organization, offensively, defensively, can be picked apart. So again, for those of you who are in desperate need in a deeper league, these can be 2 options. Let's close out today's video by talking about kickers and defenses. We begin with our number 1 kicker, Matt Gay. for the Washington Commanders. In the last 2 weeks, he has put up 13 and 18 fantasy points with Marcus Mariota. And regardless if Jaden Daniels returns, we have to remember that in 2024, the kickers for the Washington Commanders, whoever they were, we had, of course, 2 kickers rotate, obviously because of injury last season. They were averaging over 10 fantasy points per game. I'm expecting Matt Gay to get himself a lot of looks going forward, regardless of how much this team likes to go forward on 4th down. Then we have Jason Myers, who has been incredibly consistent thus far this season, putting up 8, 17, and 13 fantasy points. Missed a field goal in week 2 and in week 4, so could have easily had himself upwards of 12 plus fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. He's been a very consistent producer, even though he has some accuracy issues at times. Ultimately, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a higher scoring game, I would assume he's going to be fantasy relevant. Then we move on to Chad Ryland, who takes on the Tennessee Titans. He's a kicker, of course, who has had 10 plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. And when you take on the Tennessee Titans and you're granted that opportunity, there's even more potential for scoring upside. Then we move on to the defensive conversation. Currently rostered in 24% of leagues on Sleeper, we have the Los Angeles Rams taking on the San Francisco 49ers. Like I mentioned before, Purdy, Pearsall, Jennings, all questionable for this upcoming Thursday's game. And even if they're active, they're all going to be beat up and or injured. So this potentially could provide even more upside for the Los Angeles Rams defense, who were able to, of course, cause many of turnovers in this most recent week against the Indianapolis Colts. Again, I anticipate the Rams to be incredibly relevant within this upcoming matchup. Then we have the Arizona Cardinals taking on Tennessee. Tennessee have given up 14, 15, 9, and 16 fantasy points to opposing defenses thus far this season. 9 plus points in every single matchup. Therefore, absolutely pick up the Arizona Cardinals and fire them up against Cam Ward in that offense. The Kansas City Chiefs are the final defense I wanted to mention, primarily because they take on Trevor Lawrence, who is a turnover machine. The Kansas City defense has been averaging 10 fantasy points per game in the last 2 matchups, and I anticipate them to, of course, cause a lot of turnovers and get after Trevor Lawrence within this upcoming matchup. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my Week 5 waiver wire pickups. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go ahead and put together a couple plays via Betr for tonight's game. Of course, we have the Miami Dolphins taking on the New York Jets, and additionally, the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Denver Broncos. So let's go ahead and let's check that out right now. All right, so going into tonight's games, I want to begin by talking about the New York Jets taking on the Miami Dolphins at 4:15 p.m. PST. Of course, we have Devon Achane, who every time I have an opportunity to potentially make a play, with him going more than 3.5 receptions, I will take advantage of the opportunity, as he has gone more on that number in 12 of the last 14 starts in which he has had Tua Tagovailoa under center. Therefore, I think there's an advantageous position to take more on him in this circumstance. Now, if we continue, the other 3 hidden gems plays that we made this weekend, Jonnu Smith, Travion Henderson, and of course, Matthew Golden, in terms of their plays on Betr, all hit. Therefore, we are hoping for Breece Hall to be able to close this quad play in which we have Breece Hall going more than 49.5 rushing yards. I anticipate, considering, again, the Miami Dolphins are one of the most advantageous matchups in terms of allowing rushing statistics to opposing running backs. Breece Hall should have himself in a fantastic breakout performance here on the ground to be able to, of course, mitigate all the kind of lackluster performances he has put up in weeks 2 and 3 as of late. Then we continue on. Let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Denver Broncos. I think there's a lot of potential in Jake Browning, potentially even throwing the ball a bunch tonight. At 29.5 passing attempts, I think that's a very safe number, especially considering we are anticipating this offense to be in a negative game script for the majority of tonight. In the event in which the Bengals come out and they absolutely smoke this defense, regardless of which way they go about it, I anticipate it to be done through the air. So Jake Browning is going to be the key to this offense. So I'm expecting in a negative game script for a majority of this game with the receivers that he has surrounding him to throw the ball 30 plus times within the matchup. Now to continue, I also want to go ahead and get someone like Chase Brown into the mix. At 1.5 receptions, he has accomplished this in 17 consecutive regular season games. I don't see why you wouldn't go ahead and throw him into the mix. Ultimately, if we were to potentially keep the Dolphins separate from this game, okay, as of right now, we have 2 Cincinnati Bengals, but I would look for another potential play, specifically in the form of someone like Courtland Sutton, going more than 3.5 receptions. As you can see, he has done it on a very consecutive, consistent basis over the course of his career. So this would be the next play in regards to this. These are the 2 plays that I'm making later tonight in regards to the night's games. Again, if you guys want to go ahead, check out Betr. Again, there's a link down in the description. You can go ahead and put together a bunch of plays on your end. For those of you guys who don't have anybody playing tonight in these games, of course, it'll make it a little bit more entertaining in that regard. I'll be back tomorrow talking about all things running back with my top 36 rankings. Of course, live streaming tomorrow later tonight. Unfortunately, won't be streaming as we have 2 games, and that second game will be ending late. But I do appreciate y'all coming through, supporting the channel, and I'll be back tomorrow. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.